You want to test Azure Stack HCI 23H2, but you don't have supported hardware? Then I might have something for you, which is running Azure Stack HCI 23H2 as virtual machines on top of Hyper-V using nested virtualization. So if this sounds interesting, stay tuned and I will show you in less than 1 hour how to set it up. So after that video, you should be able to reproduce that on your own lab hardware at home. Okay. And with this, so our starting point is, having a Hyper-V system which is capable of running large virtual machines. However, it might not be able to run natively Azure Stack HCI, as this operating system requires some or has hardware requirements like a TPM chip version 2.0 and higher, right? Which my current hardware doesn't have. However, with Hyper-V on it, I still can, run that virtualized. It might be a little bit slower, but it is functional. Yes, so in the next step, we are going to prepare the virtual machines that are needed for, for the nested environment. So what I did is, the only thing I prepared my base hypervisor. I've created a virtual switch that can be used for the virtual machines to be attached to, right? And I made sure that whatever virtual machine connects to that switch, they can talk to the outbound world, because my Azure Stack HCI or Azure Stack HCI requires to download stuff from the internet. Okay. Other than that, I didn't really do that much with that system. Okay, so where's my starting point? Well, I would love to navigate you to my GitHub repository, aka.ms/bfrank. And there you should see the GitHub repository, which is called CreateHypervVMs. And underneath there, in a specific branch which hasn't been published yet, you can see, which is not, merged into the master branch, you see the scenario Azure Stack HCI branch. So this code repository, contains PowerShell code that you just copy and paste and put it onto your Hyper-V system. And that's what I do. I download the zip file to my local box. And the next thing would be, as this is an admin machine, I will copy that over to my destination hypervisor under the temp drive, for example, right? So let's, unblock it and extract the folders. And once it's there, the interesting piece is that scenario Azure Stack here. So I'll put it up a little bit higher in the directory, right? Okay. Within there, you have everything that you need for setting up the nested HCI lab. Okay. So what does a virtual machine need? Well, it needs an operating system, right, based in a virtual hard disk, and that's what we are going to do. So I created a file or PowerShell script that creates a virtual hard disk from an ISO file, right? You can do that how many times you want, how many virtual machines you need, but it will be a sysprepped image, right? A generic image that can be used multiple times for creating as many virtual machines as you want from it, right? So it's creating some sort of a golden image, if you will. Okay. So now I need the ISO files. Okay, so I need for this scenario 2 ISO files, because I want to have a domain controller with a GUI, right, which is, the environment or the domain, the fabric domain for HCI. And I want to have the 2 HCI cluster nodes, which are obviously running the Azure Stack HCI operating system I download from the Azure portal. Okay. So let's just download the ISO file from the Azure portal. So going under the Azure Arc wizard, then I select Azure Stack HCI, and there is the download Azure Stack HCI option in the middle for downloading the software, right? Remember, with Azure Stack HCI, there is no product key involved, right? For the product to be licensed, you need to register it against your Azure subscription, and there the billing will occur. Okay, so let's take 23H2 as the current version. And, you know, I just hit the download button and get a file which is sort of like 3.5 gigabytes in size. I already downloaded this and I've already copied it to my destination system, which is under the cluster storage. On the user storage, there is, you know, the ISO file I've just downloaded from the Azure portal. Okay, that's our first ISO. And let me try to, you know, create a virtual machine or virtual hard disk out of this ISO file. So I terminal server, or I remote into the hypervisor, or you do that locally. Doesn't matter, however, you need a PowerShell session to your system. Okay, I navigate to the file where I just downloaded the GitHub repository. I launch the create virtual hard disk from ISO file with the path from the local image or the ISO file, right? Where is it? There it is. Then my destination should be the same directory, but with a name like 23h2.virtualHardDisk. And we are creating UEFI based or generation 2 virtual machines with it. Now give it a size in bytes. Let's maybe give it 110 gigabytes. It's dynamic, so don't bother. And we need to specify an image index. ISO files contain more, or may contain more than one image. However, with the ISO file for Azure Stack HCI, it will only have one image, and the first one is the one that we are interested in. Okay, so what happens now is it will create a virtual hard disk with the UEFI or a boot partitioning, and it will create the partitions, name them correctly, and then create a partition which should hold the operating system, the Azure Stack HCI operating system, right? So it will, you know, sort of copy the contents from the ISO file to the virtual hard disk that is currently created. If it's finished, then it will detach it, you know, and the virtual hard disk can be used for creating as many virtual machines as you want from it, right? Okay, so finished, and you could see we have a virtual hard disk containing the Azure Stack HCI operating system as sysprepped, or sort of generic image, golden image for our two Azure Stack HCI nodes we are about to create. But hold it, there is one more thing that we need to do. I need to do the same thing for the Windows Server operating system that will be used for our domain controller. And as we want to have a GUI with it, I just use a regular Windows Server ISO file. It could be an eval version, whatever you would like. Okay, so let me do it one more time, and I will speed up the video a little bit about it. So I copied over the ISO file for the regular Windows Server, and let me just, you know, run that script one more time. We are using now the index 4, which is a server data center with GUI, and the size in bytes would be also 100. Let's take 180 gigs. Okay, done with this step. Now we have two sysprepped images that we can create the virtual machines from. However, which virtual machines? So we need to sort of configure what the sizes of the virtual machines are, how they are connected to, which IP address ranges they should be using. And instead of doing this manually, we will do this one after the other. Right, so the or that has been fully automated in this PowerShell repository you've just downloaded, right? So there are 3 files which are interesting. And the first one is that will open, it is the configuration for the virtual machines to be created. So I'll open this one using Visual Studio Code, but because we may need to tweak some things, right? So have a look there. I've made some comments in there, to give you the impression of what needs to be changed. Don't change everything, right? Just have me navigate you a little bit through what needs to be changed. I sort of, expressed where to jump to with the 3 question marks, right? And these settings probably need to change because they are sort of different on your system. Okay, the first virtual machine, or let me just, collapse that one and open it up one. So if you're familiar with PowerShell, you may know what a PSD file is, which is a config file that you can be using for storing valuables, parameters that you later on your PowerShell script will be using. And that's what I did, right? So I organized the stuff in different sections for virtual machines. So don't change the name VM0. It's always the first virtual machine. So if you would change that, you would break the logic, right? But whatever you can change is maybe the virtual machine name, right? So how it will show up in the hypervisor. I would advise you not to change so much because there might be consistency or things that rely on each other. So change only the things that have the 3 question marks, right? So for example, you will probably need to change the golden image path, which is to match your path of the system, which is, let me jump to my cluster to get the right paths, right, and to express it. So we have the cluster storage folder, there's a user storage, and there is the operating system for Windows Server 22. So let's copy this as path and replace that. Let's remove the double quotes, C:, and remove the double quotes. Using a code editor helps, in order to get some syntax errors right out of the game. Okay, so that's the first setting. I am fine with the memory settings, like 8 gig of memory for virtual processors. However, if you want to have a more beefy virtual machine, then change that. As you could see, this domain controller has 2 network adapters. One is internal facing, talking to the Azure Stack HCI nodes, and the external one is the one that is talking to your upper network, because it also acts as a router, right? It is a NAT router. So everything that your Azure Stack HCI nodes want to do to reach out to the internet will be via this host, right? So in order to make that work, you get a second adapter, which is called EXT, like external, and you need to hook it up to the correct Hyper-V switch, right? So in my case, I assumed that it is called set switch, but on the system itself, as you could see, it's called differently, right? So the one switch that is defined for the compute traffic for the virtual machines is called differently, and I need to change that. Otherwise, my virtual machine would try to find a switch which is not there, right? I don't use VlanIDs, hence I leave it empty. If you are requiring VlanIDs to talk to the outbound world, then you may need to change that. Okay, let's jump into the next box, which is our first Azure Stack HCI node. And we sort of do a similar game, which is, specifying the correct path for the golden image. And if my naming is correct, then it is called 23H2.virtual hard disk, right? Don't forget to do this on the other second cluster node as well, or HCI node as well, right? And as you could see here, it's getting more virtual hard disk is getting more processors on that system. I even, can tune it up a little bit. However, make sure that you have a symmetric system, right? These nodes have more, these ones do have more network adapters, right? Why? Because they need to talk to the domain controller. They also need to provide redundant network traffic for virtual machines that are hosted on top of them, right? Therefore, we do have two compute adapters. And then you need to have storage adapters which are capable for replicating the storage traffic, right? Remember, Azure Stack HCI is a hyperconverged solution. That means the local storage will be replicated via the network in order to achieve data redundancy, right? And these adapters are used for that. As you could see, these are all internal, so no traffic would be visible on your physical wires, right? It will be only internal on the hypervisor itself. However, the outbound traffic will be managed via this external gateway. Well, I don't want to, overboard you with too much information here, but, that's sort of it for the virtual machine configuration. Now I save that file and need to change a next one, which is the unattended settings. So let's have a look at what happens here, right? Same thing. You have the same notation here, so please don't change the names. What needs to be changed is sort of emphasized with the 3 question marks. As I am based in Europe, you see my time zone. You see also my German keyboard layout that I'm going to use. And the internal IP addresses I'm going to use for my installation. So this IP address range should not conflict with your IP address ranges, even if you have it already in use, right? Because these IP addresses here are only used internally, right? So they will be hidden on your physical network. They will only be available within your hypervisor, right? However, if you don't feel comfortable with it, then you may change it to a different range. However, be sure that you are sort of doing this consistently over all the files where these IP addresses may be mentioned, right? The DNS server is pointing to itself or to the virtual machine itself, because this one, the first VM, will be a domain controller, right? So it's using this one and will then forward to an outbound DNS server, but we'll come to that step later. Okay. So you don't really need to change that much here. Just wanted to show you how the things work. And let's go to the next file, which is the post-install scripts. This automation script I created does not only create the virtual machines with the settings and with a specific unattended file, it also performs post-installation steps like creating a domain controller, for example. And that needs obviously your input, right? For example, as I told you, this virtual machine also gets a router, and the router needs to have a gateway to forward the traffic to in order to reach out to your internet. So in my case, these variables don't fit here, right? So I need to adjust it to my local network, and my default gateway or my IP address that this box should get is the 241, right? It's not a class 16, it's a class 24 subnet mask, and the default gateway on this network is this one, right? So basically I'm hooking up the external adapter to or I'm giving the external adapter this IP address with a class C network, and have tailored to use the .1 as default gateway and use the Google DNS server as forwarder for any DNS queries, right? So make sure that these IP addresses are correct for your system. Okay, next one will be to create a domain, right? And you may want to rename your domain to a different name than this one, right? So just be sure that you have your settings there, and I will type in a password for the domain admin. Next steps is not really too much to be entering to, right? So this is for the domain controller. The steps for the other rules are just to install Hyper-V and on the virtual machines, and use or create a local admin account that could be used later on during the installation of Azure Stack HCI. Right, so maybe as we have that code path 2 times, we need to replace it 2 times. Let's just do this. And copy it here, right? Okay, so these are the the settings that I need to do on this one. So remember, installing Hyper-V is okay on Azure Stack HCI on the operating system, but don't do any updates before you are kicking off the deployment through the Azure portal. Okay, so these are the 3 files here. Then we do have 1 file left we need to edit or have a look into. Not really much, but there are 2 variables that we may need to change, which is the golden image path for if you haven't ever specified any other path, right? Let's just copy over the setting from here. So basically, this is the golden image path is an override of and let's just maybe open it up as well in code using code, right? So if you haven't specified the golden image in the individual virtual machine, the generic or the generic path will be used, right? Also for the destination folder for your virtual machines, make sure that you are choosing an existing path where your virtual machines should go, and I'll place it into a subfolder which is called Azure Stack HCI. And then we need to create a local admin account. It's password. So that's your local administrator that is being used for the installations. And that's basically it. So if we have done everything correctly, we can kick off the installation. So let's do a dir on this directory and look at the timelines when the values have changed. So I have changed the 3 files, right? And now let's kick off the installation by running CreateHypervVMs. Okay, so as it seems, yes, I am missing an internal switch here, right? So it is telling you that I haven't prepared my host adequately. So the thing that is missing is an internal switch, right? So I only have the converged switch, but as you may have seen here, my VMs are also using an internal switch, and I forgot to create that one. So let's just repeat that one. Create virtual switch internal, give it the name internal. And these settings, as it is an internal network, that's okay. Just hit apply and then okay. Good. Now let's try again. And voila, everything looks better now. So now what happens first? The virtual machine or the virtual hard disk is being copied over, right? The virtual machines are created in Hyper-V. So here are the settings for my VM. And as you could see from the sizings, it was looking up the settings from the config file. It created the virtual machine based on the settings that we did. and it's doing so also for the other virtual machines like our Azure Stack HCI node, right? The good thing about, for example, on this one is Azure Stack HCI, as it is a hyperconverged scenario, needs to have, data disks or more disks like the physical hardware when you would be running Azure Stack HCI, right? And you could create, all the physical disks or the virtual disks in this environment by hand, but that's not a nice process. So that's why I also included that to be created in that tool, right? So that's our first Azure Stack HCI node. 32 gigs of RAM, 8 processors. Yeah, that looks good. Love it. And once the system is, the virtual machines are created, they will be booted up and will start, their process for creating the virtual machines or the operating system with the settings that we have specified in the unattend file, which is basically, adding a German keyboard layout, using the Western European time zone, and that kind of steps, right? So have a look at what happens in the behind the curtains, right? You will see the output here on that window, what it does, and now it's time to get yourself a coffee. Okay, so in my case, 13 minutes later, the environment was set up, and now the final thing is to do some testing. So let's boot up the virtual machines and connect to either one of it or the two of it, and check if we can log on using the admin account, and also if we can reach out to the internet in order to make sure that name resolution works, that internet connectivity works, right? So let's wait a little bit for the domain controller. This one will take up some time. In the meantime, let's have a look at the network settings. We could see internally the 0.1 network is being used, and externally it was using my externally available IP address that I have manually typed in. Okay, that should work. Now let's log into the box, and in some occasions I like to use enhanced to copy and paste things. So for Hyper-V, in demo environments I often allow the enhanced session mode, right, which gives you the opportunity to click on this button here, and that gives you a different experience, right? So you can resize the screen, and you can also use that for copy and pasting. So okay, password works. As we have seen, the domain was already there as well. So let's try to do a ping. And for Microsoft, that might be a little bit odd. Okay, that one works. Okay, let's see if my Azure Stack HCI nodes can talk to the outside world. So let's hop onto one of those. And as you could see here, quite some more IP addresses. Okay, that looks good. And we'll check for two things. First is network connectivity. Next is to see if Hyper-V was successfully installed. Okay, so the name was set up correctly. That's cool. Remote desktop is also enabled if you want to RDP into it. And so now let's now check for connectivity and ping ibm.com. Oops. And that works as well, which is good. But from the IP address settings, we could see that we have a lot of adapters. None of them has a valid IP address except the one that we were specifying. However, that's purely internal, but the default gateway is there, which is our domain controller. And it seems that the traffic works. Okay, good. So far, so good. Let's see if Hyper-V is running. And that can be done with search all for the virtual machines that are there. Okay. It might be the case that I have installed Hyper-V, but not the management tools for it. Let's just see. Yes, so Hyper-V management tools are not there, but Hyper-V is running. Okay, good. So yeah, that may be that is a minor glitch, but no worries. That will be installed later on during the installation process. Okay, so now you have the starting point for installing Azure Stack HCI, right? So this would be it for if you would have prepared regular hardware too. And now the next steps would be go back to the repository and have a read through the documentation, right, where it says, hey, now that you have these steps, there's still one minor step to do, which is this one here, right? So this needs to be done on the physical host because the virtual machines, these two, right, they have they will be using SMB traffic for replicating the storage traffic. And that will be done through specific network adapters, which I told you, which are these two here, right? However, usually they get a, in order to make the replication traffic to work and how the Azure Stack HCI setup works, this needs to get a VlanID, right? But in order to do that or to make that work, we need to allow that on a hypervisor level. So, and that's the two commands that you need to run on the host where you have prepared the virtual machines with the adapter names SMB and allow VlanID 711 and 712 to work, right? You will see these VlanIDs later on when you are doing the installation of Azure Stack HCI, right? And I would encourage you not to, use different ones unless you are also changing these two commands here to the IP addresses that you want to choose, right? Okay, but anyways, yeah, that's it. Let's go back to the documentation. So we've done that step. Now we also check the connectivity. So the next step would be to prepare every Azure Stack HCI node to download the Azure Stack HCI components that they need to register against Azure, right? So copy over that code and make it and bring it to execution on the nodes, right? Copy and paste, and I'll do the same thing on the other node as well. And I'm using a separate console for launching PowerShell because it gives me the possibility to do different things or other things in the meanwhile, right? Okay, so let's do a prompt here again in order to kick off the installation. So there was still a prompt missing. And it will be downloading sort of 80 gigabytes, I think, for the pieces. or some gigabytes, some megabytes for the, not gigabytes, excuse me, megabytes for the packages, the individual packages. AZ accounts is needed for logging on to your Azure subscription, resources for, listing your Azure resources that you may have deployed, then AZ storage for talking to storage accounts, and these later two are used for registering this node against your Azure subscription, right? We are not doing the registration right now. This will be a later step. However, we have now the prerequisites for doing so, right? Okay, good. So that's it. Next step would be to it is a delicate step, right? So whenever you do the installation of Azure Stack HCI, you might be, you can either do a proper TCP IPv6 configuration on all of the network adapters, or the other thing would be, to disable IPv6. Leaving this in a sort of enabled but unconfigured state is not good for the installation, right? Because it will, the Azure Stack HCI, when it does validate the network traffic, it will sort of check the network paths if they are available. If you haven't configured the IP addresses, it would, not be routed there. Hence, the connection would fail, and then the deployment would fail. Therefore, I tell the cluster or tell the nodes not to use IPv6 because it is not configured, which is, the lazy approach of doing so, right? So let's do that on the other node as well. Okay, next step would be to onboard my Azure Stack HCI hosts to Azure using also similar code. And you need to run this as well on every node. However, you may need to tweak it a little bit to, fit to your requirements. So let's copy that code snippet, right? And make some useful entries for that. So first of all, the resource group should be nested. And then I need to enter my subscription details. And just make sure that the resource group that you're specifying exists. So let's create a resource group in West Europe. There you go. And now with the correct settings regarding my subscription and tenant ID, and with the components installed, I should be able to run that locally and make that node onboard to my Azure subscription. We are doing a device authentication. That means you can do that on another browser somewhere, as we don't have the browser on the local machine, as it is a GUI-less system, right? And we will download the 84 megabytes of components that will transform your node to, more of an Azure Stack HCI node, which gets the required components for the remote installation on the system. Okay, so that seems to work. So let's copy these steps and perform these on the other node as well. Let's copy the correct thing. Now the context should work. Okay, that looks good. And let's have a look at the other node, what's happening there. Okay. So installation still takes some place, right? So that's what we want to see. The download of the components and the connection to Azure. So we should see something on the Azure portal. So let's do a refresh. And voila, our first host is onboarded to Azure. And the second one will come later on, right? Okay, so now is the time when we do need to do something else, which is preparing preparing the domain controller for the installation of Azure Stack HCI, right? And there is a preparation script for doing that. So let's navigate to the public website, which is deploy Azure Stack HCI 23H2. And I'm talking about this step here, which is the preparation of the Active Directory. It tells you that you need some components to be downloaded, right? What it will do, it will create an special organizational unit in your AD and place a user account there. This is the domain user account that is being used for creating your cluster, for onboarding the virtual machines to the domain, and then hence also is the administrator user for your Azure Stack HCI cluster, right? So in order to make things a little bit easier, I've already created placed some PowerShell code on your local C drive on the domain controller, which you can modify in order to, apply to your domain, right? So let's do an edit on this file. And as you could see here, it is entering the correct domain name, right? If you have changed the domain name for your domain to create in the creation process, then you probably need to change that stuff here as well, right? So let's do this. And most importantly, you need to add your own password here. And it should be a complex password, right? So with upper, lower characters, numbers, and special characters, right? Even for a demo installation, right? So let's do that. And in the meantime, have a look at our organizational unit. I'll use advanced view, and then I go into the PowerShell code, enter my password here, and run it. Okay, so let's have a look at the domain structure. Do a refresh there. And as you could see here, this is the HCI organizational unit, and it placed a user into it, which we then later be using for deploying Azure Stack HCI when kicking off the deployment from the Azure portal. Okay, so let's go back to the resource group one more time. The other node showed up. Now you need to wait for something to happen, which is all of the extensions that every individual node needs to have, needs to be successfully created. There might be times when one of the components, especially this one, may show up in a failed state, right? Don't panic. Get yourself a lunch or a couple of coffees, because it takes, well, let's say 20 minutes, maybe a little bit more, in order to self-heal that experience, right? But only kick off the installation when everything of these guys here show up with succeeded, right? And you may also, check for the other node as well. So whoever is finished first, that's not it. You need to have it, consistently on all of the nodes, right? Okay, let's wait for that and have another coffee. However, there's one thing that we can do in the meantime, is because Azure Stack HCI has some requirements on the permissions. We need to give some role permissions. So let's do the following. We did that step. We downloaded the software, installed it, and in our virtual machines 1 and 2, we installed it. We made it up bootable. We configured the hardware. We set up routing. Everything works. We also done the registration piece with Azure, right? Now it's time to do the setup permissions. Okay, let's do that. And navigate down to where it says, here's your resource group. Now you need to have a look at the role assignments and add yourself, I mean the one that is installing Azure Stack HCI, to have the following roles, right? Okay, so let's do that. Go back to the resource group, 1 level up, access control, add role assignment. It is HCI administrator. Myself. Key vault administrator. Then it is key vault contributor. Storage account contributor. And as I am owner of that subscription, I have the reader permissions on this subscription, definitely. Okay, so I did that. Now let's go back to the resources and see if these ones are, if the extensions are successfully deployed. You see here, that's the state that I mean, which is self-healing. Give the system quite some time. I make a pause here. Yes, so after a while, the extensions all went to a succeeded state. So this is the first node. So let's check the other node. So let's go back to Azure Stack HCI node number 2, go to extensions, and there validate that all of your extensions, especially the lifecycle manager, is also in a succeeded state.